Well, look at the screen. Today, we're going to Egypt. Yes, we're going to Egypt. But it's going to take us several weeks to get to Egypt because we're starting a new series, and the series is about Joseph. And it's in the last portion of the book of Genesis. And spoiler alert, if you don't know anything about the life of Joseph, he ends up going to Egypt and becoming very influential with Pharaoh, and as a result, God uses him to save his entire people. Oh, great, I'm not coming back for the rest of the summer. But that's the plan, and that's what God has to get him to. But how is it that a young man in the family of Jacob is going to somehow become big and influential in the nation of Egypt, who has been a classic enemy in the area, a huge mega power? How is this going to happen? How does God orchestrate all of this? Because in the end, it's necessary for God to protect his promises to Abraham. So if you're thinking, wait, I don't know Abraham and Jacob and Joseph, and okay, here's a little recap. So I'm going to do a flashback in a second here. Here's how Genesis 37, you need to turn to there if you've got a Bible. This is where we're going to start today. Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings, in the land of Canaan, and these are the generations of Jacob. So from Genesis 37:1 to the end of Genesis, it's all about the sons of Jacob. Well, who is Jacob? Here's the flashback. Back in 2012, we did a series called The Patriarchs and the Promise. And to give you an idea what we did back then, here's what I did. I had to reuse this graphic because I put so much work into it. Here's the 50 chapters of Genesis. If you've never read Genesis, 50 chapters. The first section is creation. You know how many chapters is about creation of those 50? Only 2. What? Yes. That's all. That creation is done by the end of the second chapter. And then the fall comes about. The fall of Adam and Eve and all the repercussions of that is really only about 3 chapters after that. And then the flood story happens, and building up to the flood story and the nastiness of all the people, that's only about 4 chapters. That takes place right inside there. And at the end of that, then, you have people that come from the sons of Noah who end up populating the world. I call this the nations section. And that nations section is only like 1 chapter long. And it ends pretty much in the Tower of Babel. So by the time you get to there, you start Abraham. The Jaredites. Oh, they're not real, true. Yeah, they're not in this story. But starting from chapter 11, the whole book of Genesis becomes person-oriented rather than cosmos-oriented. So it's only about 11 chapters that you get the creation of the universe and the nations and all that kind of stuff. Abraham, you know how much time is spent on Abraham? Pretty good chunk right there. So many chapters is devoted to Abraham, and then after him, his son Isaac, his only son Isaac, and just about a chapter and a half to Isaac. And then after him comes Jacob, one of the sons, Jacob and Esau of Isaac. There's Jacob. He takes a huge chunk right here. And then after Jacob, it's largely about the sons of Jacob and really focuses on Joseph. And that takes up the rest of the book all the way out to chapter 50. So you can see when you look at Genesis, although people put down Genesis because it's all about the creation of the universe and the flood and stuff like that, that just takes up the first 10 or 11 chapters of the book. Most of it is about God's promise that he gives to Abraham, and that promise that goes through Abraham to his son Isaac, and through his son Isaac to his son Jacob, and through Jacob to his sons, the 12 sons of Jacob. So that's what Genesis is about. So now you got Genesis down. That's what it's all about. And back then in 2012, what we did is we took this first section right here and we said, well, you know, we're not going to talk about that. That's for another time. So we're going to put that away, and we're going to focus on the person story with the patriarchs. But the patriarchs are largely only talking about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And you see this over and over again in the Old Testament and the New, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So that's said over and over again. So we put Joseph away and said, someday, this is 2012, someday we'll come back and we'll look at the life of Joseph. And that someday is today. So we're going to look at Joseph and find out what happens with the life of Joseph, because his life is really pivotal for the promises of God to be fulfilled that he gave to Abraham and on through to us. So, and if you don't know anything about the life of Joseph, you're in for a great ride. It's an incredible story. It'd make a wonderful movie. In fact, there have been some movies made about it. So we're going to take it slowly and just march our way through it, and we're going to look at the life of Joseph, and we'll find something just astonishing. Now, the question that comes up as we do this, why study Joseph? And it's this word right here, providence. This is the word I'm going to use 100, maybe 1,000 times between now and the end of the summer. Providence. Now, what is providence? Providence, well, here's a definition. This is my thumbnail definition. It's the sovereign actions of God in the seemingly ordinary affairs of people. Like, for instance, I gave my life to the Lord when I was 15, living in Maryland, and 6 months later, we moved overseas to England. And I'm thinking, wow, everything I've ever known, everything I've ever loved, all my friends I've had since I was a child, they're all way behind me. I will never see them again. Woe is me. I hate moving overseas, but I loved it. I thought, well, maybe I'll make a life here in England. No, we were there for 1 calendar year. And then God, after the company my dad was with, promised him we'd be there 5 years. We moved back after a year, so we didn't see much England. Darn. Didn't see any Ireland. Oh, what was wrong with it? We saw Scotland. So we saw a little of that. But then we come back home, and now instead of going back to Maryland, which is where I grew up on the East Coast, and if you're from the East Coast, there really is only life in the United States on the East Coast, by the way. The rest of the country doesn't exist. And so we were picked up and moved someplace else because they'd given my dad's job to somebody else. So, but the company says we do have a plant out in Sunnyvale, California. You're moving to California. Now, the news of moving to California from the East Coast was more terrifying than moving overseas, because the culture of California in the early 70s was crazy. Well, it's crazy today, I can say that. So we go through the trauma of moving to California, and it was traumatic moving to California. And I'm thinking, Lord, I gave my life to you. Why are you hauling me all over the world? This is crazy stuff. Why don't you just plant me somewhere, and I'll get used to where you put me? But this back and forth and back and forth. And then we're in California, and I start my senior year of high school. You ever started your senior year in high school in a brand new school? It's a horrible thing. You don't know anybody. Well, so for reasons I don't quite understand, I signed up for a theater production class. I had done some theater lighting in a previous high school in Maryland. You know, set up the lights, do all that kind of stuff. Just love doing that. I'll do a theater production class, and they'll teach us how to do more lighting. Well, it wasn't about lighting. It was about acting. And so I got cast in a small play called The Flattering Word, and I was cast as the husband of a wife in a small town where I was a pastor in that city, and my wife was my soon-to-be wife. Now you say, isn't that cute? Well, and it's true. But now I look at all that, and I look at what God has done because he's put us together, and I think, gee, isn't it lucky that we moved overseas? Isn't it lucky that my dad's job was filled in the East Coast? Isn't it lucky that we came to California? Isn't it lucky that I happened to pick a class that I don't like because I'm an engineer? Isn't it lucky? Or is it providence? So providence is all about how God steers the direction to accomplish his will and purpose through things that look ordinary and random. But still he gets his way. Now we're going to talk about that over and over with the life here, because remember I told you the plot spoiler is Joseph has to be in a position of power in Egypt in order for God's promises to his great-grandfather Abraham to come true. In fact, it's a matter of life and death. So how does God elect to make his will not only known, but to have his purposes fulfilled through the sons of Jacob? How is he going to do this? Does he, for instance, he has lots of choices. God can show up at the foot of the bed of Joseph, son of Jacob, not the other Joseph you're thinking about, and show up and say, you, son, need to go and become influential in Egypt and blah, 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 blah. And here's what you need to do, and you need to go out there and do that. And he could have instructed one of these sons of Jacob to do this. But then, how do you do this? How do you, as a foreigner and a young kid, probably in your teens, walk into Egypt and make yourself a powerful Pharaoh helper? How do you do that? Well, God doesn't do that. He doesn't instruct them about what's going to happen. He doesn't instruct Joseph about what's going to happen. But yet still, you'll see through all the rest of Genesis, God's purpose is fulfilled through random lucky guesses. No, it's providence. So we're talking about providence as opposed to, for instance, miracles. And I know I'm putting a lot into this, but this is going to be a big topic. Miracles is God intervening in the life of man in very obvious non-ordinary ways. Boom, the Red Sea parts and stuff like that. Well, that doesn't happen every day. So that's really God's hand. Miracles are where God's hand is very obvious and recognizable, and he wants to be seen. And they're easy to spot on the moment. You can say, whoa, look at that. Red Sea parted. I think that's God. So it's very easy to spot. But things like this, when you're talking about providence, are things that you don't normally see until you get to hindsight. And then you see a curious string of lucky coincidences that are to your benefit. And that, my friends, is providence. That's the providence of God. So we're going to look at that as we go on, because there is no better scripture in all the Old and New Testament to demonstrate how the providence of God works than in the life of Joseph. Because here's the thing. He starts off as a small boy, and he works himself into the biggest helper of Pharaoh there ever was. And because of that miraculous transformation, his brothers and father and the promise to Abraham is sustained. Ooh, so that's what we're going to do. That's the goal. That's the goal. We looked at providence when we finished Romans recently. Here is the biggest New Testament providence verse in anywhere you can look in the New Testament. We know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. Now that is capital P, providence. All things work together for good. The next things that happen in your life and through this week, for those who love God and are called according to his purpose, are actually completely in line with what God wants for you. That's providence. Once you come to a loving relationship with him, there's nothing accidental and there's nothing lucky anymore. Okay? So that's the verse that launched us to the end of Romans, and that's what we're going to see if it really works out in the life of Joseph and in the life of Jacob and his 12 sons. So we go back. This is how chapter 37 starts. Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan, which is present-day Israel. And these are the generations of Jacob. And yet, we're going to talk about just one son, Joseph. So Genesis 37:2. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. So we're getting a little context right here. By the way, a nice piece of trivia. Joseph is 17, and in a second he's going to be yanked from his hometown and yanked from his family. He lives with his father for 17 years. At the end of the story, spoiler alert, his father comes and lives with him for 17 years. There's huge symmetries in this story that I'm going to be pointing out as we go along. So you can put that in the margin, the trivia margin right there. It's another fingerprint, in fact, and the rabbis will always tell you this. That kind of symmetry is a fingerprint to the fact that God himself wrote this story in reality. Because there's things that are going to happen that you can't orchestrate even if you tried. That's one of them, 17 years. Who are the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, who are his joint shepherds that day? Well, you're going to have to go back and read earlier in Genesis. Not too far earlier, but you remember Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons, but the 12 sons don't all come from one mother. In fact, Jacob goes off to marry a wife. He goes off and he spots Rachel, beautiful woman. He decides to make a deal with Rachel's father. I'll work for you for a long time, and once I'm done with that, will you let me marry her? Because that's his kind of dowry instead. And you know the story. The 7 years of the work is done, and he says, great, I'm ready for Rachel. The wedding happens. They get into the wedding tent. They consummate the marriage. The light comes up, and it's not Rachel. It's her older sister, Leah. You can't make this stuff up. And so Leah is now the legal bride of Jacob, but he wants her sister. So he makes another deal with the girl's father and says, basically, can I work another 7 years so I can take her as well? And so he does. And so he gets Rachel after doing this. So now he's got the two wives, and he's had the first one was a consolation prize, and the second one was the one he wanted. So he's got Rachel and Leah. He comes back, and he actually stays there. He starts a family. With these two wives. By the way, polygamy is not endorsed in the Bible, but this is what was allowed right here. And they start having babies, but Leah gets a head start. She starts pumping out babies like crazy. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 babies. And Rachel, nothing. Well, that's really bad for Rachel because she's losing in this baby war that's kind of escalating. So Rachel figures, well, the only way I can do this is socially acceptable, but God does not condone this. I'll keep saying this, but it's socially acceptable to take your handmaiden servants, which Rachel had one of, or maybe two, and we'll contribute her in, and then Jacob will get her pregnant, and then that baby is considered Rachel's. So Rachel throws in her handmaiden, and she starts making babies, and the baby war starts to escalate. Well, Leah, who now has 5 boys, is suddenly, for some reason, short-term barren. So she has to come and join back in with the baby wars. So she says, handmaidens, I've got a handmaiden. I'll throw my handmaiden in there. So she throws her handmaiden in there. And now Jacob is having sex with them. And she's starting to pump out babies who are credited to Leah's account while the others are credited to Rachel's account. And and Rachel's not having any babies at all. It's a horrible situation. Leah finally does have another baby. And then finally, Rachel has a baby. After all this goes on, 10 sons are born, and the 11th one is Joseph. Rachel has a baby. And then sometime later, she has another one, Benjamin, and she dies in childbirth at that point. But there's really only the prominent son of Rachel, the beloved of Jacob, is Joseph. And for that reason, he has a very special place in Jacob's heart. You can go back and read this. It's just a little earlier in Genesis. By the way, polygamy is not commanded by God, and every time a man takes multiple wives in the Old Testament, it turns out badly. And it does turn out badly here. So in this dysfunction, you still, though, have Jacob and his 12 sons, which will become the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob himself, his name will change to Israel. Jacob and Israel are synonymous. So, okay, we got that. So who are Bilhah and Zilpah? That was the original questions. The two handmaidens. And their sons have lesser class status than Leah or Rachel's. So basically what the writer is saying is that the lowest class sons, that is the sons of the handmaidens, were doing the lowest class job, which is taking care of the sheep. And by the way, Joseph, very beloved of Jacob, but Joseph was out there with them. Okay, that's the background. Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Joseph has a favored status with his dad. And he comes back home one day and he says, those boys, they don't do a very good job, and they're sleeping all day long and smoking and drinking, and they're not really taking care of your sheep, Dad. Joseph is a tattletale. He's a brat tattletale. And we'll see this go on as he goes on here. And he tattletales on the other brothers who are kind of lowlifes. I forget there's only 4 brothers of the 2 handmaidens. Naphtali, Dan, I forget. So anyway, he tattles on them. He brings a bad report to their father. Well, and so verse 3. Now Israel, that's the synonymous name of Jacob, is both. Israel loved Joseph more than any of his sons because he was the son of his old age. He finally got a son through Rachel. And he made him a robe of many colors. So, the author blanks on what the response was to the tattletale episode, but I can guarantee you that he did not make friends with the 4 brothers he was shepherding with. They're ticked about the fact that Joseph has gone and tattled on them to their dad. No one likes a snitch, and here Joseph feels like he's in a preferred position, and sure enough, you get to the next verse, and he is in a preferred position. His father loves him. How much? More than any of the other sons. And there's 10 older sons. There's 10 older sons. So he loves him more than any of the sons, and to demonstrate that, he gives him a robe of many colors. Which, by the way, just to be fair right now in the translation processes, there's some debate about whether it means many colors or long-sleeved. It doesn't make as good a story if you say you gave him a coat that was long-sleeved. So, but many colors, it could be many colors. It's about a 50-50 chance. So anyway, the deal is, though, is that when you give a robe to someone, an outside garment, it signifies something very important. The only way you could tell a monarch, a king, from anybody else was by the coat he wore. He was dressed differently. Same with priests, same with everybody. So really, who you were was written on the outside of what you wore. This is part of ancient culture, and we don't do that today because if you look at me today, you'd say he's a beach bum. But actually, in commemoration of the coat of many colors, I wore my most colorful shirt. Okay, never mind. But so here's the deal. What his dad has done, because he favors him, is he's given him some rank. He's given him some weight because he's given him this coat. And it's a way in which Joseph can walk around and say, I'm hot stuff. And he doesn't have to say anything. All he has to do is walk around with it. And just by walking around in it amongst his older brothers, they're going to get really ticked off because he's demonstrating the superior love of his father. Right? And that's what he's going to do. You add that together with the previous verse where he's a brat and a tattletale, and he's not going to be very beloved by any of his older brothers. He's a twit. They hate him. They're not going to like him. So he's laying this foundation, this coat of many colors. By the way, when it says many colors, there were ordinary colors that coats were in, but when you did something above and beyond and put really expensive colors, they were many colors. So the implication here is that there's actually royal colors put into this. And the royal color is purple. Why? It's very expensive, very hard to find. Most purples back in that time were made out of small sea animals, seashell creatures. So it was very hard to get. So a lot of the speculation is that Jacob gave him this coat, not just to say, happy birthday, son, and I love you more than everybody else, but to basically communicate that if it were up to Jacob and the role of leading the family after Jacob dies goes to one of the sons, instead of going to the oldest son, Reuben, I want it to go to Joseph, because he's my most beloved. So he is sowing seeds of horrible discontent with his sons. We don't do this. You shouldn't show favoritism as a parent, because what's going to happen next is what happens. Jealousy. It gets ugly. 4, but when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than his brothers, how did they see? The coat. They hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. This is really strong. I mean, they're very jealous, and they're very jealous of this guy. They won't even talk peaceably, which means every time they talk to Joseph, it's, you so-and-so little twerp. That's who they are. So in just the first 4 verses of Genesis 37, we kind of got the idea that Joseph's relationship with his brothers is broken. Largely because Joseph is a twerp. He's a brat. Because his father unwisely decided to call him his favorite amongst all these other sons, and more to come. It's dysfunction is what's happening right here. We go to verse 5. Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright, and behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf. Kind of like this. Gee, I wondered why his brothers hated him. Here's the kid who is actually this time the youngest. He will be next youngest after Benjamin's born. But he's the youngest kid saying, we were out working in the field, and I have my sheep, and you have your sheaves, and mine's going to be central, and all of your sheaves are going to bow down to mine. It's a way of metaphorically saying, you are all going to bow down to me. This is the twerpiest youngest kid in the family, who's wearing a coat that says, my dad loves me more than you. So their immediate reaction is they hate him for this. That's just natural. Now the interesting thing is, if you, again, it's a plot spoiler, if you read forward in the story, this dream will come true. It's truth. It's not a fabrication. It's not fiction. It's truth. This will happen. But what was he thinking telling his brothers? He's just going to make them more mad at him. So his brothers said to him, verse 8, are you indeed to reign over us, or are you indeed to rule over us? Which rhetorically means no, not in a million years. So Joseph, you're thinking this is what the picture is, but it's actually this. We're not going to do that. So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Do you realize how many times hated has been applied to Joseph? This is a bad scene. It's a very bad scene. Then he dreamed another dream, and he told it to his brothers. Don't do this. And he said, well, listen, behold, I've dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. The sun, dad, the moon, mom, and the 11 stars, all the brothers. So they're going to bow down to me. But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream you've dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you? Fast forward. Yes. It's true. It will happen. It's truth. But in sharing it with them unwisely, they got really ticked at him. So here we've laid the seeds for an extraordinarily dysfunctional family. How is, as you ask yourself, in the providence of God, how is God going to save this situation where it seems like the family is falling apart, and yet God's promise to Abraham is that his seed would be like the stars? Because this family is going to kill itself in just a matter of minutes. It's going to implode and self-destruct. I mean, can God actually reign over the jealousies and hatred inside a family and come out with his will? Providence? Yes. Let's see if it happens. 11, and his brothers were jealous of him. They were jealous of him. But his father kept the saying in mind. At least it was enough for him to say, that's interesting, but you're crazy. Verse 12, now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. Shechem is actually, it's north of Jerusalem, and they're staying in the valley of Hebron, which is south of Jerusalem. So it's up in the kind of the hill country to the north. They're pasturing the father's flock near Shechem. And Israel, again, that's the same as Jacob. Israel and Jacob were the same person. And Israel said to Joseph, hey, are not your brothers pasturing the flock up at Shechem? Come, I'll send you to them. And he said to him, here I am. And he gives him instructions. So he said to him, go now, see if it's well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word. So just go up and check on the boys, see what's going on, and come back and tell me how they're doing. So he sent them from the valley of Hebron, that's south of Jerusalem, and came to Shechem. Shechem actually in the north is near present-day Nablus. So when you hear about problems in the West Bank in Israel, you'll hear Nablus a lot. It's really a very central part of the West Bank. To this very day, it's very hard if you go as a tourist to Israel to go to Nablus, unless you have some special connections because it's so anti-Jewish. Anyway, it's up near Nablus. Well, he's up there, and a man finds him wandering in the fields. He can't find his brothers. So the man asked him, so what are you seeking? And Joseph says, well, I'm seeking my brothers, he said. Tell me, please, where they're pasturing the flock. Well, he doesn't know where his brothers are, so this guy says, well, they've gone away, for I heard him say, let's go to Dothan, which is still yet further north of Shechem. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. So here's this detour that happens. It takes some time. Joseph is seen wandering around in Shechem. He can't find his brothers. He's got to ask a bystander, which men never do. He asks a bystander where his brothers are, and he says they're up in Dothan. He finally connects with his brothers, and then they see him coming from afar. And before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him, because remember, they hate their younger brother. They said to one another, here comes this dreamer. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of the pits, and then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we'll see what will become of his dreams. There's great irony here, because in the providence of God, even if they did that, the dreams would still come true. That's the providence of God. But they think they can somehow mess with this. So let's kill him, and let's see what becomes of his dreams. 21. But when Reuben, who's the oldest, he's the oldest brother and in charge of all the brothers in that sense, when Reuben heard it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, no, let's not take his life. He's protecting the youngest son. And Reuben said to them, shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him. Don't kill him, but throw him in a pit. And this pit actually is a cistern. It's an underground water storage system. It was usually carved out of total rock. You know, if we were going to do a cistern today, we'd pour one out of concrete. You know, but they would take a solid piece of rock. They would chip it away inside. Solid piece of rock so it doesn't leak water. So you can pour water in and it'll hold it. So it's a cistern. So they throw him in this cistern, but it's an empty cistern, fortunately. He's not going to drown. But they stick him in there. So Reuben saves his life, kinda. He just stalls for time. Don't kill him. Throw him in there. So that's what they do. They throw him in there. And he did this so that he might rescue him out of their hand to restore him to his father. So he hasn't figured out how he's going to rescue him from his younger brothers, but he's doing this to try and protect Joseph. 23. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors that he wore. They hated that thing. And they took him and they threw him into a pit, and the pit was empty. There was no water in it. So that's how we know it was a cistern. They throw him down there. And cisterns are very capable of holding people. You can't get out of it without help from somebody else. In fact, they were usually, many of these pits, the solid rock cisterns, they were plastered inside as well, just to fill some of the micro cracks. So when you went inside, here you have this smooth stone that's got this smooth plaster. There's no way you're going to climb out. You're stuck. And you can see these if you go to Israel. You can find these. So then they sat down to eat. Well, that was a good day's work. And they sit down and they eat. Now, looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites. Remember Ishmael, the son of Hagar and Abraham, thank you. Coming from Gilead, which is on the eastern side of the River Jordan, with their camels bearing gum, not chewing gum, other gum, balm, myrrh, and they're on their way to carry it down to Egypt. They're traders going down to Egypt. And then Judah says to his brothers, Judah is the fourth oldest, by the way. Judah says to his brothers, hey, what profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Hey, come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. So in the goodness of his heart, Judah says, we really shouldn't kill him. Let's sell him! Let's sell him! And we can make a profit to boot. And then we can have dinner, and I'll be happy about that. And it'll be out of our hair. It'll be just great. Talk about dysfunction. I mean, now they're thinking killing him, yeah, that would be bad. Let's just sell him into slavery. Okay, that's better. And his brothers listened to him. So it was Judah's idea to do this. The Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up, lifted him up out of the pit, sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver, and they sell him into slavery. And they took Joseph to Egypt. Now, isn't it lucky for us they were going to Egypt? No, it's providence of God. Yes. Midianites is the region. That's over on the eastern side. Well, Moses was in Midian and stuff like that. Eastern side of the Dead Sea. Ishmaelite is lineage back to the son of Ishmael. So they were the sons of Ishmael who lived east of the Dead Sea. Whew. Yeah, so that's where we get that from. So they take Joseph to Egypt. Isn't that fortunate? 29. So when Reuben, the oldest, returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes and returned to his brothers and said, "The boy is gone, and where shall I go?" And you know what the natural answer to that is? Chase after the Ishmaelites and rescue your brother. But what he's saying is, I can't go home and face my father. I'm in charge of the boys in the field. I'm the oldest, Reuben. Where am I going to go? Where am I going to go? I can't go back and face my father now. I'm in charge of you guys. And now Joseph is gone. What am I going to do? I mean, if I was writing the story, Reuben would all by himself jump on his camel and race after those Ishmaelites, because after all, it's the youngest brother he's taking care of, and he'd run out there and he'd rescue them, and it'd be a wonderful thing, and watch out for camel's spit and all that kind of stuff, and he'd rescue him and bring him back and make a great movie. But instead, Reuben says, what am I supposed to do? He's a wimp. 31. Then they took Joseph's robe, they slaughtered a goat, dipped the robe in blood, and they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, "This we have found. Please identify whether it's your son's robe or not." There's a little bit of irony in here too. I'll be pointing out some irony spots as we go along. Jacob himself, the father, deceived his father, Isaac, using someone else's clothing and a goat. What goes around comes around. It's happening to Jacob, what Jacob did to his own dad, Isaac. Well, so Jacob looks at it, he identified it, and he says, "Is it my son's robe? It is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces." And the brothers are silently thinking to themselves, hey, we didn't have to lie. He made that up on his own. He jumped to the conclusion. This is cool. We're not liars. Our dad just jumped to a conclusion. Well, come on, you deceived him with the robe that's dipped in blood, so you're trying to deceive him, but you didn't have to say it. He jumped to his own conclusion. That's exactly what they were hoping would happen. Exactly what they were hoping would happen. He's been torn to pieces. And then Jacob tore his garments, which is a sign of grief, put sackcloth on his loins, grief, and mourned for his son many days. Remember, this is the son that he loved more than all of the others. And all of his sons and all of his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, "No, I shall go down to Sheol." That is, I'm going to die. I'm going to die and be put in the ground. That's what Sheol is. I shall go down to Sheol to my son mourning. I will never be comforted, is what he's saying. I'm going to mourn for the rest of my life till I die. Thus his father wept for him. His father wept for him. Meanwhile, verse 36, the Midianites had sold him to Egypt, to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. Gee, isn't it lucky he's in Egypt? And isn't it lucky he got sold into someone who's connected to the Pharaoh? Because after all, we need Joseph to be in a powerful position in a few years. Lucky has nothing to do with it. Providence of God. These things are all necessary steps for this to happen. And that's the end of this morning. And so as I wrap, I always want to do a providence talk at the end. Where do you see providence in all of these things? I've mentioned a couple of them already. Where do you see God's invisible hand making the purposes in the event go in exactly the right direction that I didn't bring up? Have you seen some more of them? Yeah, Brian. Yes, Reuben decides to keep his brother from just being killed on the spot. Yes, that is providence. That's God's providence. Great observation. That's a good one. Are there other ones? They usually look like happy coincidences. The caravan came by. And you know, there's more than just the caravan came by. The caravan came by at the right time. Now, when you talk about timing, there's another interesting piece of providence right here. Because remember when Joseph was sent from his dad to go look for his brothers who were up in Shechem? Remember, he gets lost and he can't find them. And he's wandering around what looks like a period of time. There's a time delay that happens until the man says, well, they're up in Dothan. And then there's another amount of time, maybe a day or two, where he moves up to Dothan and finds them up there. There's this delay in Joseph's story of finding his brothers. And if that delay had not happened, what would have happened with the Midianite guys? Would have missed them. Would have missed them. Gee, isn't that a great coincidence? Yeah, Wayne. Yeah. How many cisterns? They're really far and few between. They're out in the desert. When you go to Shechem and Dothan, it's rock city. So they're very far. Yeah, right. So yeah, that's another one too. Well, look, here's a cistern. Let's use this instead of killing him. Yeah. So there just happens to be a nice alternative to slitting his throat right there. And isn't it a nice coincidence that this cistern didn't have any water in it so he wouldn't drown? The more you look at this story and you add it all up, you say, isn't this a marvelous series of lucky coincidences that ends Joseph from being a nobody 17-year-old in his family to being placed a heartbeat away from Pharaoh in Egypt? And that is providence. Because God's going to use this string of happy coincidences because God actually is in control of every one of these serial events to bring his purpose. Because those who love God and are called according to his purpose, everything works out for good. Now, what's really a conundrum for us, and where I'm going to close on this, is the fact that it's hard for us to understand how can God be in control of making his purposes happen when it seems to be reliant on dysfunction in the lives of people. Because you've got the dysfunction of Joseph as being a twerp and a tattletale and a brat. You got the dysfunction of his brothers who hate him. You have the dysfunction of the baby wars that came through the parents and through the wives and stuff like that. You've got all this dysfunction. You got the favored child status that he gives them a robe so that the brothers get even more mad. I mean, this is dysfunction piled on dysfunction. How can God guarantee that his purposes are going to happen when you're in the midst of all this junk? And yet, that's why the story of Joseph is fascinating, because this is just the beginning of these happy coincidences, the providence of God, which will in the end save the lives of this family. How does this work? That's the mystery of providence. And that providence is what God does in your life as well. There's a mystery about how he gets you to where he wants you to be. But for those who love him and who are called according to his purpose, he gets you to his purpose. And that's what brings rest in our lives. That's why even as we agonize over difficult life choices, we can simultaneously say, well, God, thanks for giving me this task to try and figure out this next step in this decision. And I'm going to make this decision, and this is the way I think makes sense to go, God. But I'm happy of the fact that you are always sovereign and your providence always wins. So you'll get me to where I need to be. But this is what I'm choosing today. Yeah, Wayne. Yeah?
Isn't it interesting that there just happened to be
A man in Shechem that knew.
happened to know.
Yeah. That's true. I never thought of that one. So the guy in Shechem who directed him to Dothan, there's no reason why that guy should have been there or known that they were going up to Dothan. You know, he overheard something and they went up there. And in fact, if he just said, well, they left town, I'm sorry, I can't help you, then Joseph is going to delay even more looking for the boys, and the Midianite traders are going to come and go, and they're going to miss the timing again. Didn't know where they were, yeah. He would have missed his ticket to Egypt. Yeah. Another one, Steve?
Yeah, well, no, it's just that we can look back in our lives,
Hindsight.
you know, you can
Yes.
see God's fingerprint in your life.
Yes. Yeah, that's why I say providence is most easily seen in hindsight. Because you're in the middle of a situation, it seems like there's no redeeming factor in what's going on. And yet, when you look backwards, you go, I get it. Happy coincidences? No. The providence of God to bring you to exactly where his purpose wants to bring you. And that's why the story of Joseph is just going to be a mind blower, because this is just the beginning of crazy, happy coincidences from God. that affect his purpose? Okay, we need to quit. Let's pray, and we're going to sing one more song. This is the song we're going to sing, by the way, 10,000 Reasons. So, Father, we do indeed thank you for this incredible story, and we look forward to your Spirit giving us further understanding as we go, to give us an understanding about ourselves, about your role in our lives, and the providence that you surround us with, the surety of your purpose come to fruition in our lives. And Lord, we thank you that because we love you and we're called according to your purpose, everything works together for good. Everything. And Lord, our minds and our hearts are too small to weigh the moment by moment things. They look like they don't have a good end, and they could never have a good end. And yet your providence, while mysterious, is sovereign and in control and never accidental in what happens to us. And so our hearts rest in that, and we rest in your love for us. So give us understanding through your Holy Spirit, and change our understanding about how we take our steps tomorrow because of your providence today. So thanks in Jesus' name. Amen.